I'm really suspicious, right? It'd be great if it's true, and if they've worked something out, this will be, very impressive. I've seen a lot of things, claims like this before. One of the sort of things that makes LLMs what they are is that they can hallucinate sort of new things.
Good morning, Sam. How are you doing?
Morning, Matt. How are you? Are you cold in NYC on your
Uh,
travels?
it's I'm in a nice warm hotel right now, but yeah, it's pretty cold out there. It's around freezing. But yes, 9 a.m. fresh here, 6 a.m. on the West Coast, doing some traveling for our AI event. We're going to be talking with Goldman Sachs today, and a bunch of others. But look, I want to jump in and cover the Amazon announcements around AI, agentic AI, but specifically the automated reasoning that Matt Garman, the CEO of AWS, said can stop 100% of hallucinations. This claim is huge, Sam.
A huge claim, and a very, almost unbelievable claim.
So you've worked on this. You've been deep into the development of AI for years. You're probably as advanced as anyone in looking at these things. What do you make of this claim? And you and I talked with Swami, the VP of AI and data, for an exclusive preview on what he's saying about this stuff later today on stage. But what do you make of it? He said it was going to be a big deal. He picked it out as one of his favorite children of all the announcements that they're making. What's your thought
Right.
on this?
So look, it's of course it'd be fantastic if it's true. I really kind of feel like, okay, we need to see it, we need to test it. People need to see what actually it does. When they say hallucinations, LLMs can hallucinate in many different ways. In fact, hallucination is one of the features of LLMs, right? Is that it can come up with new things through hallucination. So, surely they haven't taken that away from the model, or my guess is that they've really got something that probably just tries to limit, and hopefully maybe 100% limits the model sort of swearing, the model sort of saying anything off brand, that kind of thing. And you could imagine that there's a variety of different ways that people have been trying to do that for a while, with some success, with some not such success. But it is something that people gradually are getting better at. And the models themselves now take instructions much better. So unless there's someone sort of deliberately trying to sort of incite the model, or, sort of jailbreak the model to get it to do something, most of the models now are a lot better than what we had, say, 18 months ago.
What did you make of Swami's claim that this is a mathematical proof thing? He talked about this being the yin and the yang of AI, right? So you've got the yin, which is the LLM, which hallucinates. The yang, he seemed to be saying, is, as you say, very different. It's not changing the model, but it's interjecting a mathematical technique, he called it, right, which offers formal mathematical proof of why an LLM reaches a decision that it does, so that you have this way to check whether it was intended to answer, in a wrong way or a correct way, and so it becomes a guardrail. So it almost sounded like they're using science to reduce hallucination, and which I find fascinating. I think it's related to the other big story that's being driven on our site, VentureBeat, right now, which is re-ranks 3.5 model from Cohere, which is also interesting because it detects hallucination. It's a model teacher. One of the things is, Swami said that there's very few, while it's a known mathematical process, right? It's an understood mathematical research topic. This yang that we're talking about, right? But that very few people know it. So it's almost like he's hinting that they have some talent at AWS who have figured this out.
Look, I'm really suspicious, right? It'd be great if it's true, and if they've worked something out, this will be, very impressive. I've seen a lot of things, claims like this before from, various organizations and stuff like that. I think definitely, like I said before, limiting hallucinations has gotten a lot better compared to 18 months ago. It's a world of difference now. And there are lots of things out there. And there are lots of techniques as well where people can sort of use some of the things that have gone into the O1 models to sort of work out where the model is going and is it going in the right direction. So my guess is that they've got something like that. I, but is that at the end of the day going to illuminate every single hallucination? I'm really suspicious because, like I said, one of the sort of things that makes LLMs what they are is that they can hallucinate sort of new things. If they've never seen, an email that I've sent to someone else, and I'm saying, hey, make up this email and make it kind of like this. In some ways, they're kind of having to hallucinate something to be able to do that. Now, they're obviously doing that from sort of things that they've referenced in their training data, that kind of thing. And I think all the models now are being trained on a lot more specific data rather than just sort of random data being thrown in there. So that's sort of making these models get a lot better too. But let's see. The whole announcement of the Nova models was very interesting as well. Like the way that they sort of calculated whether they were ahead or on par with models, it was a little bit kind of out there, that they kind of averaged things out. And I thought it was kind of interesting that they were like, oh, you can try and reproduce these results too. We've put up how we did it on the website. Not sort of saying you can reproduce, but you can try and reproduce these sorts of things. Look, I think they've obviously gotten into the model game. They've obviously been working on a lot of this stuff. They've probably learned a lot of cool stuff from Anthropic, who I think are probably the leaders at a lot of this stuff. Anthropic has gotten very good at guiding models. Their alignment is probably, I would say, probably state of the art at the moment in their ability to have the model refuse certain things, but not do it in a dumb way. Like, we saw sort of a year and a half ago where models would just go, as a large language model, I can't help you do blah, blah, blah kind of thing, and to the point where it would just get painful for people. I think Anthropic's got much better at sort of going, okay, you shouldn't do something illegal, and I probably don't want to help you do something illegal, but I'm just going to put that out there, kind of thing. So if AWS has learnt from Anthropic, then yeah, maybe they've got something that's probably a lot better than what they had before, at least.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think we're in some really interesting territory, Sam, where AWS is potentially feeling defensive from being caught on its heels with Gen AI. I think there was this perception in the marketplace that Microsoft, with its relationship with OpenAI, Google, with its great foundation in AI, were ahead, and AWS, the cloud leader, has been losing market share. They're feeling a lot of pressure, and so are they coming out with these big statements that could be read as potentially more powerful than they really are? It's a good question. I remember Sarah Bird, who's the head of responsible AI at Microsoft, at one of our events. Again, we're talking with enterprise leaders, some of the end user companies at these events, and how they're applying AI. And hallucination always comes up as the big problem. And she was saying, hey, Microsoft is working on this stuff, in terms of dealing with hallucinations. And I think there's these various techniques, but it's interesting that AWS has come out with such a big claim. But the people running around like Gary Marcus or Ed Citrone, right, with these big screeds about how AI is never going to, Gen AI is never going to work because of this hallucination problem. If they solve this, then there's just no holding back the hype in the market. So we'll stay tuned on that.
It is interesting you mentioned Cohere in there. So Cohere is kind of like, obviously they're a small startup compared to AWS, right? They've taken a really interesting sort of approach, though, in trying to sort of package up a whole system for people. So this is one of their advantages. So this week they just announced their re-ranker 3.5. And what they're trying to do is train multiple models to work together. And I think this is a really interesting approach, right? That, and they also kind of understand that probably most companies don't necessarily need the best model. They need the best sort of system to be able to get RAG done and to be able to get their data into the LLM context window properly and all stuff like that. So that's an interesting, announcement from them this week that they've updated this as well. And yeah, for sure, all these companies are going to get better at hallucination. I'm just suspicious when they say that they've got it solved 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to touch on the other two big things. There's a lot of announcements from AWS, and it's happening as we speak. There's a bunch more over the next day. Collaborative agents, right? That was the thing that also Swami touched on in our conversation with him.
Agents are quickly becoming like one of the big ways that people are actually starting to adopt and put these LLMs to work. And the easiest way now we are starting to see people doing that is with Bedrock agents. Even for instance, Rocket Mortgage and fintech company, they'll coming and talking about how they are actually building on Bedrock agents to build amazing workflows on document processing to several other capabilities. But especially as these companies are scaling their agentic platform, new set of problems arise. They don't want a single agent that does all problems. They are building highly specialized agents. Some are actually very good in document processing. Some are doing different things, but they want the ability for these agents to collaborate and share state, and they so that a central entity or orchestrator can actually appropriately delegate tasks and share state and so forth. So this reinvent, we are launching Bedrock multi-agent collaboration. That means I, as a developer, can enable multiple agents to collaborate with each other and provide a framework to share state and actually orchestrate these requests. We think, especially as enterprises start scaling their agent deployment, because many of them, despite being on the bus, they are still in super early stages in deploying them at the scale. And once they start doing that, they are going to find themselves in a scenario where they had to actually have multiple specialized agents with each one covering different things. But you want the ability for them to collaborate and chain them together.
They seem to be differentiating themselves from Microsoft and others by emphasizing these collaborative agents working with each other in a way that, say, Microsoft did not, right? Microsoft talked about multi-agents. I'm not sure if Google's really come out and made a big deal around collaborative agents. It's a concept, obviously, that people were working on. This is not new, but the way he talked about Amazon having this special experience around microservices and also having insights from having built this QDev agent, which Swami said made a big claim, saying it's best in class on SWE benchmarks, right, for engineering tasks. I'm not sure if we've seen that publicly, Sam, if you have any thoughts there, but basically saying, hey, we have that insight from our great cloud experience around microservices. We're going to bring this to bear. What did you think of that claim?
So I did think that was really interesting. Like that was when I asked him specifically about like, do you see these as the new microservices? So microservices sort of took off, 10 years plus ago with this idea of that, I think Amazon was the first one or AWS was the first one to introduce Lambda functions, the idea of just having a small amount of code that runs in the cloud. And if you think about it, what is an agent? It's a small amount of code that runs in the cloud and can talk to an LLM. So they've had a lot of experience at doing these things. And it was interesting that he even sort of mentioned that they had sort of had some debate inside about whether, where these things stood in relation to that and that kind of thing. Look, I do think, I do think that a lot of the agents are going to be very similar to microservices, right? I think that's how these things are going to end up sort of running when you put them into production. That said, I kind of feel like everyone's doing the same thing, right? You can call it multi-agent, you can call it collaborative agent, you can call it one agent that calls a lot of sub-agents. There are lots of ways to language it, but at the end of the day, you've got some piece of code that's being like an orchestration layer that's calling other pieces of code, each of them can sort of talk to an LLM. Each of them can maybe get some kind of reasoning from some external source, get data from some external source, and be able to use that to contribute to their function. So I think Swami also mentioned that, like, back in the day, they called it workflows at AWS. So, I do think it's kind of interesting that a lot of people are seeing sort of analogies to what people have tried to do in the past. The only difference now is that LLMs, really make these things a lot more useful and a lot more, sort of interesting, the use cases that you can use them for.
Sam, let's go and hit this on the head. Something you mentioned here was that everyone's doing this, right? And it does feel that these massive cloud companies are trying to come out and corner the market with their scale, their reach, right? Microsoft, Amazon. And yes, they're doing, best practice in terms of multi-agent, collaborative agent framework offerings. However, if everyone, if all the big scale, cloud companies are doing this, the big enterprise companies and developers too are not necessarily going to want to be locked in. So there's this market for a kind of an Uber orchestrator, kind of a lightweight technology that allows you to be agnostic, right? And so let's get into that, because I think you saw LangChain out there being something that was trying to do that with LangGraph. We wrote a story on VentureBeat about Emergence, this new
Right.
startup that is that has a similar strategy, wanting to work with everyone that works well with these other cloud companies. So you're not really cordoning anything off. You saw something called Pydantic AI just now. I don't know if that's in the same rubric. Do you want to talk about
Yeah,
what
like, so
Pydantic
okay.
AI is?
So one of the biggest challenges is with agents and with LLMs is constraining their inputs and outputs, right? That you want the output to be structured. So you want it to be in a way that you can just take that piece of the output and use it in your app, and take another piece and use it in your app, that kind of thing. So the library that everyone's been using for that has been a library called Pydantic. And that was originally written for APIs, right? It was originally written so that people could use it for controlling what goes into an API, what comes out of an API. And it turned out that this was really useful for LLMs. So, a number of libraries, including, LangChain, started using it early last year. Now, the interesting thing is that recently Pydantic went to Sequoia and raised a bunch of money, and just in the past day or so, they've released this Pydantic AI, which is their own take on an agent framework. And it's not, it's much more lightweight than something like LangChain. It's much more sort of built for production, built for, being able to just work in Python, that people can sort of, take their other, the other code bases that they've got in Python, put this into it and use it. Uh, you know, so it's very, very interesting, right? It's going to be interesting to see that all the other agent frameworks have been using Pydantic sort of validation at the back end, and now that company has basically decided, well, we could do this whole thing ourselves, right? And we've got some opinions about how it should be done. So I think like that's going to be a big challenge. I think you're totally right that a lot of companies are going to go, hang on a minute, do we really want all our data going through the AWS slash Microsoft slash Google, thing, so that they can see how we're doing everything? Maybe we want to kind of just, have it run on a service and we can, do it ourselves, kind of thing.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's going to be a big play there from a lot of startups, because it's an obvious place to go. So yeah, 3 or 4 players there at least to keep an eye on, and there's probably about 20. I want to go to the kind of the third area that Amazon prompted right after the first two, intelligent prompting. So intelligent prompting is something that Swami also pointed out as an area that he's really excited about. And it's this whole idea of routing a question from the user to a model that is appropriate for that question. So if it's a small question, and Swami used the example of a travel app, right? So let's say you're just asking for the weather in Paris, during August, right? Maybe that's a small model question, right? But then if you're creating this 2-week itinerary to go to France and you've got specific interests. You like beaches, and you want to be in Paris on the last day of the trip, and it has to be on the during the Olympics. You're going to send it to a bigger model. And so he talked about how they feel that they have something differentiated there. But what you're seeing a lot there, right? And again, probably Anthropic is bringing some things to bear for Amazon. AWS is part of that partnership. But you're seeing the other bigger players do that too. Did you hear anything from Swami that gave you a sense that AWS has something special there? Or is this again something that's going to be commodified and everyone's doing?
I think mostly it's going to be commodified. I think the one thing that was interesting, we didn't really get a straight answer out of him, was are you going to do this over just the Nova models or just the Anthropic family of models, or are you going to do this over all your models? So if it's over all your models and it can sort of decide, well, for this one I'm going to use Llama, and for this one I'm going to use Anthropic, and for this one I'm going to use Nova, then it kind of becomes interesting, right? Because OpenAI is only going to do it for the OpenAI models, Google's only going to do it for the Google models, etc. So we don't really know yet. Are they going to be doing it sort of across the whole, across their whole sort of, every model that they've got on offer, or just across families of models where that family's got maybe 3 or 4 sizes. And there's arguments to be made for both of those, right? Like that you could sort of say that this prompt is kind of suited to this family of models. That when you prompt a Gemini model, whether you're prompting the Flash model or the Pro model, they're kind of different versions of the same family kind of thing. So prompting that versus prompting OpenAI and Gemini, that's quite different. So it will be interesting to see how they roll that out.
Yeah, I think you want to. If you're AWS, right? He made a big point about how AWS was first in being the agnostic kind of Switzerland player when it came to models, right? It was a convenient strategy, obviously, because they didn't have a big play, right? Like Microsoft did with OpenAI and Google, obviously, with Gemini. They did tag up with Anthropic relatively late. Now they're investing big time, but obviously it was in their interest to be agnostic. I think it played well, but doesn't it have to be intelligent prompting across all models at some level, right? I mean, if they really want to play that game, I get what you're saying is that you also want something that prompts a family of models because potentially the user is interested in just that family. They just want the best, right? The end user is probably going to want both, or maybe there's certain cases where they just want the best model, right? And I think Microsoft is doing that with kind of fine-tuned versions. We heard from Charles Lamanna, right? They think 90% of their customers are going to want a nicely fine-tuned model around 4.0, right? The OpenAI model is a default. But anyway, it feels like they have to do something more global.
Let's see. Like we don't also know. We also don't know what agreements they have with Anthropic. Whether Anthropic's going to let them do that. There's going to be obviously some. You could imagine if you're Anthropic, you don't really want your models being mixed with maybe the Llama models or or the Microsoft open source models or something like that. So it's going to be interesting. The key thing is that routing thing, that idea of routing to the best model for the right price is going to be commoditized though. Everyone's working on it. Everyone's got something like that coming out or in the sort of pipeline of coming out. And up until now, we've seen a few startups do it, but I kind of feel like once the big players do it, anyone that's sort of doing it for a startup is not going to be in a great position.
We haven't touched on OpenAI. So they have opened an office in Zurich. They've recruited 3 people to leave DeepMind and join their office over there around vision. You have some insight there.
Okay, so,
Lucas Bayer, I think, is the lead author on
yeah.
Vision Transformer. What is going on there?
So this is not just 3 sort of random people. This is like 3 people that have worked really well on a lot of key vision papers, including the VIT or the Vision Transformer, which was sort of the first model, the first paper to sort of really introduce uh, transformers to doing vision tasks. Now, pretty much every task now is using a transformer, right? They're also the team that's behind a thing called Siglip, which was a sort of competitor to a thing OpenAI made called Clip, which was sort of a way to encode images and text into a similar sort of space. And so it's very interesting that OpenAI picking up this team, especially when I think Lucas Bayer had been not so pro OpenAI on Twitter in the past, right? So you've got to wonder, like, okay, is this just some huge offer of stock that has convinced them? Is it that, like we've seen other people leave DeepMind perhaps because they felt like disenchanted with some of the things that were going on? It does seem to me that a lot of these researchers are just jumping around at the moment, that they're sort of like looking at like, okay, and it also seems to me that the whole reason for this OpenAI office in Zurich is for these three people, right? Don't be fooled. This is not OpenAI. I don't think OpenAI is going to be taking a lot of job applications in Zurich at least next week, right? Maybe in a few weeks down the road, but they've opened this because they want to keep those people, and those people want to stay in that, in Zurich, right? So I think Lucas Bayer was already saying this morning on Twitter that this was, sort of agreeing with people that were saying that this was a win for the Swiss AI community, and Zurich has a university called ETH there that has produced a lot of good PhDs for deep learning in the past. So it's going to be interesting, right? This is we're in a whole new game, and it's kind of funny because this is happening just on the sort of back of Google just releasing VO, which probably this team had some contribution, at least to parts of what got used for doing that. I don't know that for sure, but it's like, this is Google's new vision model that can make videos, so text to video. Amazingly, they've released it before OpenAI's released Sora. It's going to be very interesting to sort of see what happens with this.
One question for you in terms of there's so much excitement about the video generation, in part because it's so visual, and we're visual beings, right? We love to see you're typing in a text, maybe prompt, and then see a video spring from it and bring something to life. How much of this is showcasing? I noticed that OpenAI did something with Sora, but then kind of left it languishing for a while. There's a lot of players here. How much is this, if this is in the sweet spot of actual deployable AI? Again, you're out there in the developer community. Is this a showcase, or is this something that's really going to be enterprise grade for deployment?
Okay, so I think it's been on the edge. It's been exactly on that edge, right? On that cutting edge of like, these are obviously big models. To put them into production is not a simple task. But these companies have started to work it out, and Google in particular has done very well at putting a lot of these things into production. If anything, over the last year, this is probably the last year, 18 months, Google's really learnt how to take some of these big models and put them into production. And I think like this is, an interesting sort of interesting model of like where that people can, like you said, it's just so visual. I was lucky to be to have a little play with VO and sort of test it out. And one of the things that I've seen with that is it is amazing that you can sort of type in, hey, give me a picture of a black cat with a Batman cape, hitting a tennis ball around, and it just happens, right? It's kind of nuts that that something that's probably never existed in reality, this thing can sort of just make. And make it look realistic. Now, the interesting thing that one of the challenges they're going to have is everyone is going to compare this to Sora. And I think to be fair with all of these models is all of these models tend to be, because they're so stochastic, they tend to be really good at certain things and maybe not as good at other things. So the Sora model was out there first, so everyone sort of saw, oh, it's good at this, it's good at this, it's good at this, it's good at like a pirate ship in a coffee cup. So now people are going to want to test the Google model, and maybe the Google model is not going to be as good at that sort of little domain of pirate ships and coffee cups, but it's going to be good at something else. So you're going to get a whole bunch of debate over which model is good, good, which is not good. That said, I will say one of the cool features of this is you can take a picture and stick it in there and then have it just continue that as a movie. And you got to think for B-roll, for videos, for sort of background shots for movies and stuff like this. This is pretty revolutionary. And looking at where the tech's going, pretty soon people are going to be able to do whole commercials with this. I think next year we're definitely going to see some teenager in his parents' house, his bedroom or something, make some movie that people end up watching that's going to be like an hour-long kind of movie.
These are exciting times, Sam. I know we're at time, but I think there's a lot of great stuff on the horizon. I mean, interestingly, tomorrow we're headed to Washington D.C. to do an event around AI regulation, or apparently the lack thereof, right? Because of the new administration coming in and being anti-regulation. So a lot of companies and big enterprise companies are kind of wondering how they build their AI if they don't have any guides. At least that's what we've heard from Wells Fargo and some others. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, no regulations stopping any of this from happening. So I'm sure we're going to see some really cool stuff coming down.
Lots of cool stuff, and we've still got how many more weeks to the end of the year? I think there's still a couple more models coming out. There's a number of things that we'll probably see over the next few weeks, which are going to be pretty amazing.
Okay, we'll stay tuned. Thanks, Sam.